Hi everyone, welcome back to Chess Master Journey. So today we're gonna learn another King's Pawn opening, which is the Nimzowitsch defense. So let's take a look at the variations we have under that defense. First of all, let's see the position for the Nimzowitsch defense. First, E4, and for black, and C6. Okay, so this is already known as the opening for the Nimzowitsch defense. Okay, now how we can continue the game onwards, and what are the variations that we have under this defense? So let's take a look. So first, for white, let's say we go for the knight to F3 square. Okay, so now this is known as the Nimzowitsch decline variation. Okay, so in this position, the black, let's say there are a lot of moves that can be done for the black. So let's say the black chose to move the D pawn to D6 square. D pawn to D6 square. Okay, if you can take a look at this position, a knight, and a pawn is out. So this is known as the Williams variation. Okay, this is the Williams variation. So how are we going to continue the game under this variation is, for white, we can perhaps move the D pawn to D4 square. And then for black, we can go for the knight F6 square. And for white, we can go for the knight also to C3 square. And then for black, we can develop the bishop to G4 square. And the white bishop to E3 square. White bishop to E3 square. So to continue the game, for the pawn, for the black, we can use the pawn to move E to E6 square. And the white, we can go for after this bishop. So for white, you can move the H pawn to H3 square. So in this position, the bishop either can go to H5 or go and capture the knight in F3 square. So let's say we choose to go to H5 square, BH5. And in this position, for the white, you can still push your pawn further in front to D5 square. It's a position, as you can see, the pawn is already protected by this pawn and also the knight. So then in this position, let's say the pawn goes after the white pawn, EX D5. And then this pawn, EX D5. So now we can go for the maybe bishop to F3 square. So BX F3. And queen capture, QX F3. So this is how you can develop your pieces under the Williams variation of the Nimzowitsch defense. Okay, this is if you had moved the D6 square, okay? So let's take a look at the next position. So for the white, we still go for NF3. Now let's say we choose to move the D pawn also, but this time we go D pawn also, but this time we go for the D5 square. So in this position, it is also still known as the declined variation. So what we're going to do is the white pawn going to capture the d5 square, pawn ex d5, and here the queen comes after the pawn. So to attack this pawn, to attack the queen, so you can move the knight to c3 square. And then you can go for the queen to a5 square. And further for the white, you can move the, probably you can move the bishop to b5 square. And the black bishop to d7 square. So for the white, as you can see, we can go for castling. To make the black piece to stronger, so you can move the a pawn to a6 square. So this is how you can develop your pieces if you had moved your d pawn to d5 square. So next, let's say we move the f5 square. So let's say we go for f5 square, the pawn. Okay, so this is known as the Nimzowitsch lean variation. So to continue the game further, you can use your e pawn to capture the f pawn, so ex f5. And then you can move your d pawn to d5 square. So this is known as the lean variation and also as the Colorado counter accepted. So you can see on the screen. So Colorado counter accepted. Okay, so to continue the game, the white you can move, perhaps you can use your pawn. So you push your pawn to d4 square. And then the black bishop to capture the pawn here, so bx f5. And for the white, as the minor pieces are still undeveloped, so you can go for the bishop to b5 square, bishop to b5 square. So then we can go for the e pawn to e6 square. So this is how you can develop your pieces under the lean variation of Colorado counter accepted. So let's take a look at some other moves. So let's say under the same position, let's say we don't go for f pawn, let's say we choose to move the e pawn. So e pawn to e6 square, e pawn to e6 square. So this is known as this position is known as the Nimzowitsch Franco-Nimzowitsch variation. So this is Franco-Nimzowitsch variation. So to continue the game under this variation, you can use the pawn to move to d4 square and the black pawn to d5 square. And now in this position, rather than capturing, what you can do is you move the e pawn forward, so e to e5. And now here, what you can do is, so the black, you can push your f pawn to f6. So now you can go for the minor, develop the minor pieces. You can go for the bishop to b5 square, bishop to b5 square, and the black bishop to d7 square. And then for the white, you can go for the queen to e2 square. And the black knight, g knight to e7 square. Now for the white, you can go for the castling. So in this position, the black pawn goes after the white pawn, fx e5. And then this side we go, bishop goes after the knight, bx e6. And then this knight goes after the bishop, nx e6. And here, as you can see, the knight can go after the pawn, e pawn, so nx e5. And now you can develop the queen for the black side, so queen to f6 square. So this is how you can develop your pieces under the Franco-Nimzowitsch variation. An example how you can develop your pieces. Okay, so that's what we can see of if we move the pieces under the nf3. Let's say we don't move the nf3. So straight away after the opening, e4 and c6. So we go for d4 position. So d pawn to d4 square. Okay, so this becomes the king's pawn game, which is the Nimzowitsch defense. So what you can do is for the white, you can further develop the d pawn to d5 square. And now as you all can see, this is known as the position is known as the Scandinavian variation of the Nimzowitsch defense. Okay, so to continue the game, what you can do is you can develop the white knight to c3 square. And then the pawn can capture the e4 square. So this as you can see the position on the screen. This is known as the Scandinavian variation of the Vogel-Jubow variation also. So to further continue the game, what you can do is to push your d pawn to d5 square. And in this position, it becomes another opening which is known as the Van Grid opening, and this becomes the Berlin Gambit. So you just can continue the game. You can push your knight to e5 square, knight to e5 square. And then queen to d4 square. Okay, then you can move your knight maybe. So knight to g6 square. So this is how you can develop your pieces under the Scandinavian variation if you move the d4 pawn to continue the game. So let's say we don't use the pawn or the knight. Let's say we use the bishop. So let's say we use the bishop. So bishop to b5 square. Bishop to b5 square. Okay, so this position, as you all can see, this is known as the pseudo-Spanish variation. Okay, so what you can do, how you can further continue the game under this position is, you can move the knight for the black, so knight to f6 square. And then for the white, you can use your d pawn to d3 square. And for the black, as usual, the d pawn to d5 square. Then you develop your queen to e2 square. And for the black, you can develop the bishop to g4 square. And we go for the knight to f3 square. So as you can see the position here, so you can, for the black, you can push the e pawn to e6 square. And now for the white, you can use the B knight to move to D2 square. And then the bishop to E7 square. And now you can move the pawn to H3 square. So in this position, the bishop can go capture the knight in F3 square. So BX F3. And here you can use the white knight to capture the bishop. So NX F3. So next for the black turn, you can go for the castling. So this is how you can roughly develop your pieces under the pseudo-Spanish variation. So that's all for today. We had learned a few of the variation under the Nimzowitsch defense opening. So to all out there, be like a pawn, move steady and slowly, and you can end up to be something powerful and greater. So thank you, and don't forget to subscribe our Chess Master Journey by clicking the subscribe button. See you all in the next lesson. Bye.